brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.
We're installing the KAWS exhibition today. 6 large wooden sculptures which have to be assembled bit by bit. It's quite a task. We've got 85-ton cranes on site, 2 20-ton trucks, 22 technicians, wagons running back and forth. We've had 13 40-foot trucks onto the site this week just delivering the sculpture.
I think that when people see this exhibition, what they will understand here is the sheer quality of his work. It's quite extraordinary.
You saw a piece and you're like, wow, like that guy took a Calvin Klein ad and made some type of sperm cell probably, wrapping around a woman or whatever, and you're like, whoa, what's that about?
KAWS's lines are all perfection. He knows how he wants this art to feel, he knows how he wants you to feel, and he's a complete master over what he's doing.
If it's a canvas, if it's a product, if it's a toy, if it's a wall on the street, I think he doesn't care. It's really about being able to communicate in a way that's meaningful to him.
You know, I don't really try to impose like any certain feeling or like a reaction. I'm not trying to pull a reaction out of somebody when I make a sculpture. No, I just want them to take from it what they can.
Brian Donnelly goes by the name KAWS. Best known for his work as a painter, toy maker, product designer and sculptor, he's created an instantly recognizable aesthetic that has seduced followers all over the world. His most famous creations are the crew of characters he's developed over 20 years, such as Bendy, a sexually disconcerting tadpole-like creature, Companion, the first character to take 3D form, the bold figure of Chum, and Accomplice, his pink bunny-suited rabbit.
You know, when I was a kid, I was always drawing. It's sort of like the thing I retreated to, and it wasn't for really any reason. I didn't know of like artists. I thought artists were dead people in books, basically. When I was in class, if I was disinterested, I would draw on the sidelines of the books, and you know, any chance I got, I used that as my crutch to deal.
KAWS grew up in Jersey City, where, from a young age, art was an escape.
I actually met Brian, or KAWS, when he was still in college. First, he brought me his portfolio, right? So he was in illustration school, not in fine art school, and he had the most amazing portfolio. I mean, he could literally do anything. I mean, he could do Rembrandt. So he had this like very vast skill set, and now he's kind of narrowed that down to like his thing. But, you know, he came from a position of power where he could do anything, and then he picked the thing he was going to do, and he stayed with it.
He got caught up in the heady New York graffiti movement when he moved to Manhattan in 1996.
It's not an adventure just to be a studio artist, but it's a huge adventure to be a street artist or a graffiti artist, because you go out at night, you're breaking the law, you're going to some really high, dangerous place, you're knocking up something, and the next day everybody can see it.
And suddenly graffiti kind of gave me a sort of way to communicating with other peers, or other older kids. It's just, you know, I learned a lot. You know, I was trading photos with kids in Germany, kids in Spain, and I was going, you know, around the Bronx and Washington Heights taking photos. So yeah, it was sort of like a gateway into thinking more broadly about art. When I started getting more into graffiti, I started to think about just a name that I liked the letters and how they worked with each other. And you know, if you're going to paint the same letters over and over, you might as well find something that you think is suitable.
Nothing that KAWS does is ordinary, and the graffiti is of a huge scale on bridges and freight trains and trucks. The quality of it is quite extraordinary. The way that it's painted, it is exceptional painting, and that of course is what marked him out against all of the others, or some of the others. There were a lot of very good graffiti artists working in New York at that time, but he was very clearly, from a very, very early stage, considered to be one of the best.
The name he made for himself as a graffiti artist coincided with a surge of advertisers in New York taking up coveted graffiti wall space for their billboards.
In the 90s, there was this sort of explosion of wall painting with advertising in Manhattan. There was these, I think it started with these giant Donna Karan murals that were like, you know, from curbside to building top, these giant DKNY with cityscapes in them, and then eventually other advertisers started to do it, and all these great spots that were graffiti spots for decades were suddenly getting painted over. So, you know, I just felt that it was kind of strange that, you know, it was sort of taking a lot of the sort of younger voices away, and I like the idea of taking some of that property back. I started painting over billboards, which were these giant advertisements on highways, and I would just stand on the platform and paint, and there would be cars going by in the middle of the night.
This kind of engagement with advertisers pushed KAWS to make his graffiti increasingly provocative.
When I moved to Manhattan in '96, I started working over phone booths and bus shelters.
He got a key that enabled him to open the cases in bus shelters and phone booths, and he removed the posters, took them to the studio, worked on them overnight, and then surreptitiously put them back into the cases. And so New Yorkers were confronted by Kate Moss and Christy Turlington in their Calvin Klein underwear, encircled by this figure called Bendy, or cavorting with him. And he's a very ambiguous character. In some ways, there's a kind of friendliness about him. In other ways, that's the opposite of that is true.
I started to think about how like advertising worked and how that communicates to such a broad audience. And thinking of graffiti as being such a small, closed-off world that, you know, the participants really kind of understand what's going on. But to the greater public, it just, you know, you can look at a wall and really not know what you're looking at. And when I was working over the ads, I started to think about using sort of iconography that would operate in a broader sense. It wasn't quite graffiti anymore.
For his specific art, he employs the XIs, which signifies death in older cartoons. He would just use popular characters that a lot of people grew up with, such as Peanuts, Snoopy, dating back to Mickey Mouse in the 1920s to present times with SpongeBob and Simpsons. So he like really reached a broad spectrum of generations.
In my opinion, the skull and crossbones heads are masks. They're hiding the foibles and the fallibility that we all have. And in some of the works have, on their hands, their gloved hands, have this cross. And in some works, the hands go over the eyes. And it's as though, from my perspective, the figures are hiding themselves from the world, and yet they're still looking through their fingers. They're still aware of what's happening out in the world.
He wants to speak through visual imagery. He wants to speak through accessible visual imagery, which is figurative imagery, right? And he's just looking for mechanisms. He's looking for means in which he can convey his ideas.
Over the years, KAWS's relationship with commercial advertisers became closer, but at the same time, more complicated.
There's a Captain Morgan billboard that he graffitied, and then Captain Morgan incorporated that graffiti into their next generation of advertising. So this symbiotic relationship begins at a very early point, and this sense of what is fake and what is original is established very early on.
KAWS has undeniably become a cultural phenomenon, but this success has raised questions about the relationship between his commercial outputs and his standing as an artist. Artist KAWS came from the New York graffiti scene to become an international cultural phenomenon. He's made his mark on everything from painting and sculpture to clothing and product design. But the turning point for his career in the commercial world came after meeting a toy designer in Tokyo.
In Japan, there's a company called Bounty Hunter, and I was introduced him to this company I was working with called Hectic. And you know, they were making toys. They were making small edition toys. They made this toy for this English artist, actually James Jarvis, and he was interested and happy to do a toy with me. So I just did, you know, a bunch of rotation drawings the way you would in animation of what a figure would look like from each angle. And we worked with a sculptor and sort of sculpted it and got it right. And then suddenly, yeah, I have hundreds of these toys that I took around and sold on consignment.
Before I even knew who Brian was or who KAWS was, I saw the character that he created. So here I was in Tokyo, and I saw one Hong Kong dealer, and he had a table, and on his table he had these, well, I would say, look like Mickey Mouse characters. And I asked him what they were, and he said these are called companions. And he gave me a price, and I said, I want to buy the whole table. I want to buy everything you have. I just knew that this was something that was so cool, and I had to buy it, I had to get it, I had to have it, and I wanted other people to see it.
The companion in 1999 was a really important point for a number of reasons. I mean, for one thing, it gave him a kind of economic viability because they sold like crazy, and then he was able to make more and to do other things. But it also, I think, spoke to him about the possibilities of what sculpture might be, of how he might be able to make sculpture.
You know, I'd only known my work in 2D in the past from drawing and painting. I've been doing that pretty much my whole life. So to suddenly have like a sculptural thing, and it really just got me thinking about what else sculpturally I can make.
I mean, when I first started working with Companion, it was as a toy, and it wasn't really even thinking of this character that would have any life beyond the first sculpt. You know, I've always sort of jokingly imagined it to be something like 15 feet tall. And here it's only a few years later, and it's 40 feet, and it's filled with helium on the Thanksgiving Day parade. It's just bizarre.
I know Brian was excited, but I was probably just as excited as he was to see, you know, the character, the companion, from how, you know, I had it, sold it, and all of a sudden everyone can see it in life size, floating in the Macy's Day Parade.
If you have a balloon in a Macy's Day Parade, you're big time. The art world really hasn't got a piece in the Macy's Day Parade until KAWS.
As if confirmation was needed of KAWS's success on the public stage, he was soon given the ultimate assurance of his place in popular culture.
In 2013, KAWS really broke the barriers of what an artist can do. And he was approached by MTV to reimagine the Moonman Award in his own image, the companion image, as well as design everything, whether it's the banners or the stage itself.
So suddenly it went from, oh, the sculpture, the trophy looks amazing. Would you want to design the whole stadium? And of course, I'm going to try to, you know, make the most of that opportunity. So suddenly we're working with these giant inflatables and designing stage sets and doing all the visuals for the tickets and the advertising.
Reflecting his high profile in the media, KAWS's products were becoming desirable collectibles. In 2014, his original fake companion sold for $129,000 at auction, one of the highest prices ever achieved for a toy. He has a growing family of fans all over the world.
Anytime anyone ever comes into Toy Tokyo, the first artist, toy, anything related is KAWS. You have anything from KAWS? You have anything about KAWS? You have this KAWS, this KAWS?
When the collectibles and the figures were released in the retail market, they started off as low as $98 or even as low as $50. And now they skyrocket, some tenfold, some more than that. The 4-foot companion roughly fetches for around $30,000 to $40,000 in auctions, and his small scale limited edition collectibles range anywhere from $100 to $25,000.
In my collection, personally, I got at least about a good 70 to 100 KAWS pieces in my collection. What collecting means to me, it's something that represents who you are. And that means, like, if you come to my house and you see like bear bricks and you see like KAWS figures and you see like bathing ape stuff in my house, you know that's what I'm into.
Most of these I acquired back in 2013, so a few years after its release. What he's saying is underneath what would be a dead companion is actually full of color, there's life in there, and you can really see, you know, what makes the core. You get the psychology on a molecular level that people are more than what they are on the surface.
For some, KAWS's work means more than mere collecting.
KAWS helped me become who I am as a person and define my career path. So what started out as a hobby really took off, and I really invested a lot of time and blood, sweat, energy into it, and it really pays off, and it really becomes doing something I love every single day, you know.
But does KAWS's commercial focus in any way diminish his importance as an artist?
The art world in which we live today is a much more complicated, a much more chaotic, in some ways is a kind of balkanized chaos. And within that balkanized chaos, there are multiple registers of value. And those registers of value are how we determine quality and importance of art. Now, those registers overlap to some extent. One register, for instance, of value is the market. Another register of value is critical acclaim. Another register of value is museum exhibitions and collections. KAWS, I think, has been very successful as a commercial artist. He's also very popular with critics and collectors, but his art historical value, I think, is questionable.
Most artists in history have been commercial artists. Most of the greatest artists that we adore were commercial artists. Rembrandt was a portrait artist. You paid him, he made a portrait of you. Michelangelo worked for the church. He did these spectacular pieces for the Pope. It wasn't really till the 20th century that the concept of art, you know, this pure sacred thing that's art for art's sake, actually existed.
To treat him as any less of an artist because he's involved in a directly commercial enterprise, or the fact that his skill set transcends the art world, I think is a big mistake. It's additionally something that makes him much more interesting as an artist rather than less so.
When KAWS was looking at other artists when he was growing up, and I think he's someone who's always looked at other artists, he was looking at people like Warhol, he was looking at Jean-Michel Basquiat, he's looking at Klaus Oldenburg and Keith Haring. So people who are creating pop-up shops, people who are creating products, they're interacting with the world of fashion and advertising and design, essentially just merging those barriers.
You know, it's just the same way that people try to like compartmentalize you with like, oh, you know, there's people that know me from graffiti and they're like, oh, you're a graffiti artist. Oh, you're a toy designer. If people, of their first interaction with me is at a museum, they're gonna be like, oh, contemporary artist. And I always felt like those labels are unnecessary.
A museum exhibition is a serious test for any artist's reputation. But for KAWS, would his first ever show in the UK help secure his place in the art world as a major contemporary artist? KAWS's first ever museum show in the UK has just opened to the public. It's a pivotal moment for him as an artist.
Every bit of weather has been chucked at this show. We've had wind, snow, ice, the whole thing, but always people out there.
I mean, physically, there's always like obstacles when you're installing something of this scale, and you know, you have to consider sort of how is it grounded, how, you know, what are the winds in Yorkshire, like just things that you don't at first, like when I was thinking about sculpture, I never thought about, but then, you know, you realize it really becomes about engineering.
I think they're fantastic, and it's really something quite different that we've done here before. And there's some little children standing behind me earlier on, and they're just standing there with their mouths open thinking Mickey Mouse has just landed.
It has a look of Disney about it.
The finish is lovely as well,
Yes.
and the wood is lovely,
Yeah.
and the size is spectacular.
It is, very much so.
I think it might encourage the youngsters to actually get involved in art more, because it's not that, dare I say, studio or the fine art. It's more of a pop art in some ways.
Seeing it with the tree lines, seeing the wood sculptures, there's a certain warmth to it that I think really works. And then also it's the first time to have them all on the same sight line. Like, I've never been in a situation where I can look across and see them at different scales, or walk from such a distance where you have this little pea that eventually becomes this towering figure.
The thing that, I find really moving is watching how people just kind of converged onto this space, and that I've never seen that area of land come alive in the way that it did. It's beautiful, really beautiful thing to see.
Not only is the show a crucial opportunity for KAWS to consolidate his position in the art world, it's the first time he's been able to explore the use of wood on a grand scale.
The first wood sculpture we did, we wanted to make the hardest one possible, so we went with making a 10-meter sculpture. That just took, a lot of engineering to figure out. And I thought Small Eye just being, sort of a reference to Pinocchio and a wooden character that, wishes it was real.
This Pinocchio, this Small Eye, is 30 feet tall. He's as tall as a tree, practically, next to him. And he has this little slumped figure. It's the most compassionate work I think we have in the exhibition. And even though these are not human, these are, in a sense, these are toys or they're beasts, but the sense of humanity is very, very powerful in them. I think that when people see this exhibition, what they will understand here is the sheer quality of his work. I can imagine KAWS in a room with Joan Miro, with Henry Moore, and they would be talking for hours, because they have very, very shared concerns.
Big, flat, pure colors, people respond to them so much because they're so beautiful, and it's really something we don't get from nature, so that's something we depend on art to get, just the ecstasy of color.
I think KAWS's career is taking him everywhere. Really anywhere he wants to go, and I think the art world's a much more interesting place having him in it.
I think of it as art. What started as a toy now becomes art.
I feel like I've always put myself completely into the stuff that I do. It's just really naively optimistic about things, and it's worked. I mean, knock on wood, who knows, you'll be doing a story about me and bankrupt and selling my home. But at this moment, it's worked out.
Every show I see, I think, wow, he's taken it to another level. Do you know what I mean? He's like a great jazz guy who's got complete control of his instrument. He has his style, and inside his style, he just keeps bringing it up to the next level. I can't imagine anybody not wanting to own a KAWS painting.
Brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.